I was having a chat recently with a member over on Patreon about natural sponges and how I use them in my paintings, and I like to keep it fairly simple. So I use water from a mist bottle, the sponge, and then I'll bring it all together with a brush. That's an old calligraphy brush, and I use a synthetic brush just for mixing the paint down in the palette. I'm going to be working from this painting I did a little while ago. It was a quick sketch. I used a brush for it, but I thought it was a good subject to demonstrate the sponge with. It's perfect for foliage in trees and things like that, and getting a lot of light effects. So I'll be working from this today. Now, my approach generally is I'll saturate the sponge completely and then wring out as much water as possible, and that makes the sponge very soft. But I don't want too much water in the sponge because that will make the paint disappear and run down the paper. Now that's the problem that the member over on Patreon was having, is that it just always looks washed out. So water control is key to this. So I mixed up a little bit of paint in the well there, and I bring in some water on the paper, tiniest little bit to start off with. You can always add water, but you can't take it away really. So tiny bit of water to start with, and then a small amount of paint on the sponge, and then I'll build up layers as I go. I don't want to go in too heavy to start with. So very lightly dabbing the sponge down onto the paper and building up a little layer of paint there, starting off in the distance, and then I'm going to work closer. So I can make this blue a little bit stronger now, so a bit more cobalt blue and a little bit of light red in there, and get some variation in the colour all the time. And so very lightly at this stage building up a sense of distance, and so getting those cooler blues off in the distance. And I can warm that mixture up slightly with a little bit of light red. So gradually working my way around. There's no rush with this technique. You don't have to work too quickly. So let's get a little bit more light red, a little bit of raw sienna in there now. And so thinking of everything as one big joined together shape at this stage. So thinking in terms of distance still, so laying in these shapes, which will largely be covered up, but they're still there, and they're going to act as the trees behind the main canopy, which I can start working on now. So I'll bring in some cadmium yellow. And so quite a lot brighter, a fair bit warmer as well. But again, joining it all together as one big shape, moving the sponge around the whole time as well. So I try not to make the same mark twice. So let's make that paint a little bit stronger still, a bit more cadmium yellow in there. Now I'm getting a mixture of slightly harder and soft edges. And the sponge is great, I think, for laying in foliage in trees especially, because you get thousands of little marks that you couldn't necessarily make with a brush. And it's almost instant as well. So let's make that mixture slightly greener now. More cadmium yellow, mix that in with the paint in the palette and a little bit of blue. And I can bring these marks all the way up. I want the light, I want it to appear as light shining down through a canopy of trees. Now it's worth noting actually that the painting I'm working from was done in a portrait aspect ratio. Now I'm painting this in a landscape. It doesn't really matter. It's really more the fact that it looks better on the camera. It fits in the shot more. But so you can paint it in whichever aspect ratio you prefer. So building up the layers still and getting even darker now, a little bit thicker with this paint as I come down, and then painting these little bits of grass and little shrubs along the edge of the lane. But the whole time leaving behind lots of little areas of white as well, and all of that is going to add to the overall effect and should have the effect of making it look fairly light. So very dark now. I've mixed some more yellow in with everything in the palette. And you'll notice that I haven't cleaned the sponge out at all either. I work from light to dark, and I can always add to the paint that gets sucked up by the sponge, and it's kind of almost mixing within the sponge as well, and then also mixing together on the paper. So let's bring in a tiny little mist with the bottle. Let's soften some areas, allow some areas to slightly blend together. And so I'm going to do a little bit of work with the brush now, and it's just the synthetic round brush that I've got there that I've been using to mix the paint. And I've got some light red and a little bit of raw sienna. And I'm going to bring that in all the way across the bottom of the sheet, and then up through the lane. Make it ever so slightly darker right down in the foreground. Now a lot of this will be covered up when I lay some shadows in. I like to get that colour in fairly early. And now I've picked up the calligraphy brush. Now you may have seen me use this brush in other paintings. It's a very old brush. I don't know what brand it is or anything like that. But I've had it for years and it's quite tatty, quite punished, but it works very well for painting trees, I think. So I've got a blue grey mixture, just the paint that's built up in the palette, and I'm laying in a few tree trunk shapes which will largely be covered up, but again they're there and they'll add to the sense of depth. I don't need to put too many in, just some random vertical marks. And let's grab a little bit more cadmium yellow, make that quite bright. And now I'm going to wring the sponge out. Let's get rid of all that dark paint out of there, and again give it a very good squeeze and get as much of that water out as possible, and then pick up that cadmium yellow. Now I can start laying that in on top, bringing it over the edges of where I've laid in the colour for the path. So joining all these shapes together. Let's get more cadmium yellow, a bit of light red. I can make that quite orange now. Get some autumnal colour in there. And now I'm working from the sketch that I'm using as a reference, but I'm not following it exactly. I'm looking at how the shapes are emerging on the paper rather than being too rigid about it. You can really get caught up in trying to copy all the details, and I don't see the point in that. When I painted that sketch, it was painted very quickly and loosely, so I still want to maintain that approach. Let's bring some marks across that path as well, and that just help tie all these areas together. Let's drop a bit of ultramarine into that mixture and a little bit of light red. I can start getting some dark marks in there now. Now I use the same techniques really when working with a sponge as I would with a brush. I'm laying paint over the top of slightly damp paint, so still working with slightly thicker or slightly drier paint, so less water in this paint now, and it will lay over the top without running together too much. So let's make that mixture a little bit darker with some more blue, more red. I can start building up the shape of these bushes along the edge of the path, using that same paint up in the tree canopy as well, so building up areas of shadow over the top of the areas of light. And so the whole time I'm looking at how much water is on the paper, how much water I've got in the sponge and in the paint, and then making a decision as to where I can lay a mark over the top. Now it will take a little bit of practice to really get your eye in to how much water there is. It's not really something you can talk about or explain, really. It comes from practice. Let's go back into the calligraphy brush and get a little bit of blue, a little bit of red. Let's touch a bit of raw sienna in as well and drag that all the way across the palette there. So I've got a whole range of mid-tones working from warm to cool. And I can use all of that to lay in some tree trunks that are a little bit closer now. And once I start getting these darks in, it should really start pulling everything together. So lay that tree trunk in, tie it down into the bush. Just get a little bit of red in there. So always get variation in the darks. Don't lay all these in one dark colour. It's always tempting to use something like a Payne's grey, I think, to lay in dark tree trunks. But mix your own darks and then vary them the whole time. Every time you go back, put something else in. Let's get a bit of cadmium yellow in there as well. It's quite nice to put in some branches and trunks using a little bit of green. And so never using one colour to lay in a tree. Always vary it. Never lay it in one dark colour. And let's drag a little bit of that blue and red paint all mixed together there. And weave in the branches in and out of where I've laid in the foliage. Just touch a little bit more blue into that mixture. So creating the impression of lots of little branches and twigs and all kinds of things going off up in that canopy there, dragging little bits of dry brush across as well. That helps with the light effect. Now bringing in a few darks along the edge of the path. Little saplings and little bits of grass and all kinds of shapes in there. And now let's just repeat all of that on the right hand side. So some random little tree marks. Let's get some red. Let's make a tree quite warm over on the right hand side there. Now I can have that one coming out at a little bit of an angle. Bring that all the way across, join left and right together. Now more variation, a bit of cadmium yellow into the mixture, and again bringing it in and out of where I put the foliage in, so like weaving the branches behind and then some over the top. And so really building up the impression that there's hundreds or thousands of tree trunks and branches and little things there, really without doing much at all. It's all working with the texture that I've already laid in with the sponge and tying it together by adding these hard dark marks. Can drag in with a little bit of dry brush the impression of some shadows, try and make these shapes look more three-dimensional. And already getting these few tree trunks in there, the scene's starting to take shape, starting to look convincingly like a woodland path. So bringing in some darks on this right hand side as well, following the shape of the bushes that I've already put in there. Let's get a little bit more red into that mixture, make it a little bit browner. And again, same as before, bringing up some tree shapes, weaving it in and out of the foliage. Tie that shape into that bush, making sure I don't cover up everything that I've already done in the first wash as well. Now bringing these shapes all down together, I've joined left and right all the way around as well, making little connections. Touch some strong darks in, down towards the bottom of the bushes, all the way around. Now again, using the edge of the brush, dragging on tiny little bits of texture. Really building up the impression of thousands or even millions of little leaves and little bits of foliage. Okay, let's mix up some blue, and I can start laying in some shadows coming across the path, so make these slightly bluer the further away. Now I can make them warmer as I come down towards the foreground, so it's not much more than pure cadmium, cobalt blue should say, further away, and then I can touch a little bit of light red into the mixture, so make the shadows slightly warmer. So even more red in there, a little bit of ultramarine. And so I think it's important to get variation in your shadow colours as much as you would in your darks and all your foliage colours as well. So always get variation in pretty much everything that you do. So more blue, more red. Bring this shadow all the way across and then all the way down. The whole time making sure I don't cover up everything from that first wash. I need to leave little areas behind and want it to look like there's some dappled light coming down through the trees. So pretty much cover up the whole path with these shadow colours, but leaving behind little areas of light. Now I've completely dried the painting, so I need to bring it together with a few very strong dark marks. So I'll mix up some quite dark paint now with some ultramarine, and I'll keep it as red. I haven't used any burnt sienna in this painting at all, so I'll mix my darks with ultramarine and light red. Now I can pick out some shapes here and there, little bits of dark across the trees, around the bottom of the grasses. And so it's all about pulling the painting together now. And these little areas that I left across the path, I can touch with some dark paint, and that might create the look of maybe there's some stones and little things like that in the path. So wherever there's a little highlight, I can drop a bit of dark underneath. Don't need to put a bit of dark on every single one. Just looking around, trying to find a pleasing shape amongst everything. Now, same over here on the right hand side. Just a little bit of very strong dark to pull everything forward in the foreground and hopefully push that distance a little bit further back. Let's try and create a little bit of a line going down the middle of the track, help to lead the eye in to the painting, and also helps again with perspective. Now it looks actually a little bit pale down in this foreground, so I think I'll try and drag some of this darker paint all around, but again make sure I don't cover up the little highlights. So dragging that around makes the foreground look a tiny little bit busy, but hopefully not too much, and that really does help with the perspective. So join left and right all the way across with this dark colour. And that's brought that foreground forward and pushed that distance back that tiny little bit more. And now I think I need to bring up a little bit of this dark shadow colour into the trees. Now you create a strong sense of light really by the darks that you add around it. So let's get some of that really strong dark up there in these trees and really make that light pop. I don't need to do too much, just a little bit here and there. A couple of tiny little dark branches. I don't want to overwork it, but it's quite a busy painting anyway, so I don't think I really run the risk of doing that at this stage. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. Okay, that's the painting finished. Now it's using the natural sponge to paint pretty much all of the foliage in the trees, and I find it quite a useful tool to get thousands of tiny little random marks that are really quite difficult to make with the brush, and now moving the sponge around constantly to create that variation in the texture, but starting off really quite pale and then gradually increasing the thickness of the paint, or reducing the amount of water in the paint I should say, and really build up that sense of perspective, and then you bring it all together with that few dark marks with the calligraphy brush, and it's quite an effective way I think to paint a woodland scene especially. But anyway, I hope that answers your questions. If you've got any other sort of subjects or any techniques that you've seen me do and you want a little bit more tuition on that, then follow me over on Patreon and drop me a line over there and I'll try and make a video for you. Also, I've got a group over on Facebook now for YouTube subscribers and members and Patreon members, and you'll be able to find that if you search Watercolour with Christopher Stephen Art. You'll find the group and you can join over there. But anyway, thanks for watching everybody, and I'll see you in the next demo.